welcome to the Startup Grind.
So this month, we have a really special guest. So all around the world, we're actually highlighting female founders this month in conjunction with the 40 Forward program. So please, I'll introduce you to, please give me a really warm round of applause for Ria Persad Carlo. So Ria is awesome, and it's interesting. I'm going to read this, so I usually try to memorize it, but there's no way I can memorize this. So she studied mathematics and physics at Harvard, Princeton, and Cambridge. With a doctoral study at Rice University, her experience in climate modeling began at Lawrence Livermore Labs, their supercomputer center out in California, in 1991. She performed Earth and solar system modeling at NASA after that and went on to work on the trading floors at Lehman Brothers. And then she was a consultant for Goldman Sachs. A climatologist at Enron and Duke Energy. And from there, she went on to develop some long-range weather prediction products from that perspective. Did some work with the US Department of Defense. And after that, decided to go into some modeling systems. So we'll talk a little bit about that and kind of how you built the company after that. In the Midwest, she worked for the space program. She has been listed as an innovative subject matter expert on the US space program and was recently appointed as an advisor to NOAA's climate business. And if you don't know what NOAA is, they're the people that do all the weather protection things. And being a big diver, I love NOAA, so I think that what they do is amazing. And then she also received an honor from the Women in Engineers and citations from the Secretary of Energy, as well as the US Senate on Scientific Achievement. And if that wasn't enough, just so we're clear, right? She also received citations from Ted Kennedy and Hazel O'Leary. And then most recently, right, you won the very first PowerGen International Woman of the Year award, right? Yeah. So a tough act to follow.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. So I told Ria when I spoke to her last week that I'm usually not intimidated by speakers, but today may be a little bit different. I don't normally get to interview rocket scientists and things like that, so it doesn't usually work out like that. So it's interesting. I'm going to ask you, talk a little bit about your background. So
Sure.
You are originally from Trinidad and Tobago, correct?
Yes, that is correct. I was born in Trinidad and Tobago, and we immigrated to the United States when I was pretty young, you know, through Ellis Island and that whole immigrant thing. And I spent most of my years here in the U.S., but I did apply for my naturalization, you know, not too long ago.
Okay, that's all right. That's all right.
Yeah.
So so you're pretty young when you came in, right?
Yes.
So I read a lot about your background in kind of preparing for this. So there's a question I'm kind of dying to ask you. So how was it being a 6-year-old featured in Oprah magazine? I'm just curious.
Well, so I was in Oprah magazine because I play the piano as well. And I do it as an amateur, which means that you are, you know, I always had the science and the math and that kind of thing going on, but Oprah wanted to do a feature on people who who had a passion for something other than you know, the mainstream thing that they were doing, and how it was that working people were able to accomplish things outside of their 8-to-5 jobs. And so I don't know of any better way of saying how to accomplish something like that outside of your 8-to-5 job, except work overtime doing that. and so it's just a matter of, you know, we're passionate about doing things or about our interests and stuff. And so it could be, say, if you're an entrepreneur and you have your job and then, you know, you want to start some type of a venture, and so then that's kind of outside of what you're doing 8 to 5. And so having that kind of commitment and passion often means, I haven't figured out a way to get around overtime and just, you know, work. You know,
but how does a 6-year-old have overtime? I don't understand.
Well, that was when I first started, you know,
Right.
piano and all of that. And it's an interesting thing that happened. So I wanted to actually be a concert pianist when I was younger, or it was one of the things. There were two things I wanted to be. I wanted to either be a scientist or a concert pianist. And my parents strongly discouraged me against the music route because they didn't feel that would be lucrative and
Right.
that practical stuff. And so that the music thing just had its kind of ebb and flow over the years
Okay.
in my life. But then when I came to be in my mid-30s, I thought, I want to really, I don't know, it's just something in me said, I just want to really do this.
Okay.
I want to, take lessons again. I want to compete in the piano competitions with all the 7-year-olds, who are taking piano lessons. And
That's awesome.
And so that was what I did. I'm this adult, and I'm showing up to, the local right here in St. Petersburg. I was in their piano competition with all the little
Okay.
6-year-olds and 9-year-olds doing the same
You
pieces.
need to let us know
Yeah.
next time, and we'll all come support you. We'll be your cheering section.
But I started to learn, it became something that I started to learn about myself, that in music anyway, things just blossomed for me later on in life. When I was younger, it was just playing the notes and it was fun. But later on in life, I actually accelerated through
Okay.
music very quickly when I was in my mid-30s. And so in a matter of a couple of years, I ended up winning an international concert piano competition.
Wow.
And so that wasn't something that I think I could have achieved younger. I think it was just the maturity of being older and the commitment to it. And there's something about late bloomers. I don't know. Sometimes you can find yourself, later on and
Now,
decide
that's
to
kind of
do
funny
that.
that you call yourself a late bloomer because, like, after
With
Open,
that.
right? From that, and so I'm going to kind of ask you a question, but I want to give a little background for anybody who hasn't sort of read Ria's background. So you started doing research, right, on asteroids under a mentor at CIT when you were 12 years old. And
Yeah.
from there, you went on to, a year later, you were at Boston University. By the time you were 14, you had developed different methods of numerical integration. Is that the right term, since I'm not a rocket scientist, right?
Yeah.
And then you went on to win, 2 years in a row, the science fair at MIT. Graduated from the Boston Latin School when you were 16. And then decided to go to Princeton and work on the Hubble telescope. Not really that big a deal, later on. So you've pretty much been at every Ivy League university out there, I think, or really close to it. You've mastered quite a few of them at this point. How did going through that from an education perspective at that young age, that's really a lot, right? How did that impact you as a child, and then as you grew up, kind of the choices that you made?
Yeah, what's interesting about this whole math science track that I was on was that my parents were not college educated, and so they didn't really know or understand what I was doing. And so I was marching to the beat of my own drum. And so when I was a little kid, I was this kid who was building my own batteries and kind of electrocuting myself and pulling things out of the house. And my mom was freaking out and, what are you doing? And my science fair project, I was trying to build when I was 9, I was trying to build a scale model of the solar system and bringing that to school and pulling things from the house, like wrecking things. And so I was really, I don't know that I would want a child like myself necessarily.
It's okay.
That was just the kind of kid that I was, very curious.
Sure.
And very experimental. And so science was very appealing to me. So I just had this kind of natural curiosity and interest in it. And so I was always reading anything I could about science and astronomy, things like that. So I was the kind of kid, once you showed me something or introduced me to something that I really liked, I just wanted to learn about it, even if it was different and getting myself into trouble. So throughout the years, what was kind of cool was that what my mom did, what she did to encourage me was, even though my parents they weren't educated themselves, they wanted to send me to the best schools. And so the best public schools anyway,
Sure.
what we could afford. And so I would go to schools where I had some really encouraging teachers who saw that I had that curiosity and that kind of interest and that drive. And so this research that I did in high school was the result of kind of a dare or a challenge. My physics teacher said to me, knowing my personality, he said, I want you to go and go and do this math problem, which was an unsolvable problem. But I didn't know it was unsolvable, and it was deceptively simple. The formula was like this tiny. He's like, solve this equals this. Just go home and do that. It was an unsolvable thing. And I'm like, oh, I can do that, And I couldn't. And, 2 years later, I made a science project out of it and developed it further.
Okay.
And ways of cracking entire classes of problems that fell under that. But it was that challenge and that competitive drive to stick it to my physics teacher that caused, that precipitated this research. And if it hadn't have been for that, I would have never gone to science fair. I would have never done that project, and I probably would have never gone to Princeton. It's just really something how certain things happen in life that then catapult other things. Yeah.
All right. So you're a problem child. I understand.
Yeah.
I think it's good to know. It's like, but you did some other things after that too, right? So you actually worked on part of the Pathfinder mission, right?
Yes,
You were involved in that, and you were at Rias for a little while, and then you did some DoD stuff we don't think we can actually talk about because they were classified programs before you went to Duke and Enron. So you kind of went from that. What about that next phase, right?
Yeah.
Really moved you to do that? What was it that was the motivation to go do that as the next thing? Because you could have pretty much done anything at that point.
Well, a lot of my life has been, I'll be on a certain track or program, and then I just see what opens up. When you're just out of college or just out of school or out of your first postdoc or whatever, you'll apply to a whole bunch of things. And then I just kind of saw where the chips fell. And so when I worked at NASA on the Mission to Mars program, let me just tell you how I got that job. When I was at Rice University on my PhD program, I actually became very, very ill. I was paralyzed from the neck down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so
I didn't find that anywhere, by the way.
no, that's not in my bio. But I was in Houston, and I was hospitalized, and they didn't know if I would recover from that. Usually people die from that. It was a very exotic strain of infectious disease that I had contracted somehow, and maybe in travels or something.
Sure.
And so that really had me down for quite a few months in the midst of my PhD program.
Okay.
So throughout that whole thing, it was really unfortunate what happened. I missed some of my qualifying exams. It was just a mess. And so I had a choice of repeating the year, or I just didn't really know what I was going to do at that point.
Sure.
And so one thing that was happening was that I was running out of money, or I was probably out of money because of the medical condition.
Sure.
And I did, as you can see, rehabilitate from the situation, right? And that was I had to learn how to walk again and all this stuff.
Wow.
So I just said, well, I went out on a limb, and I said, what would be my dream job? And when I was 6 years old, I wanted to work for NASA. I just got this thing in my head because my first grade teacher was telling us how people from NASA went to the moon, and I was like, that's what I want to do, and that dream kind of stayed with me, that I wanted to work for NASA.
Okay.
And so I just sent my resume, and these were the days before internet.
Right.
Okay, these were the days when you were either faxing or somehow getting stuff off the yellow pages and actually typing stuff on typewriters and mailing them to people. Those were the days of resumes that I came from. And so it was hard because I would be at the fax machine getting lists of phone numbers from the yellow pages of tech companies and faxing my resume, you know?
Wow.
And then for NASA, I got an address and I just went out on a limb and I sent off my resume to just randomness, you know, at NASA. And it came back. They're like, "You're perfect. Come work for us." That's what
Wow.
came back. And I was so young at the time. I was 20 years old or something thereabouts. I can't remember if I was 21 or and it was right during the mission to Mars, the Pathfinder.
Oh, very
It
cool.
was a once in a lifetime experience.
Sure.
So that was like the path that my life took. But I always say, you know, if you have a dream, just like go for it. What does it hurt to send your resume to that dream company or whatever, you know, that
Sure.
it doesn't hurt. All that they'll do is say no. So what? You know, it's like just they might say yes. So I'm a person to just go for it. And that's how that happened. And then but at NASA, when that mission to Mars came to an end, that was a contract. So then again, I was out on the job market applying for things.
Right.
And so, and at this point in time, the internet was starting to be, you know, it was starting to come around. So I found a few job ads on the internet, but I still had to fax, you know,
Right.
kind of transitioning over. And so I sent out all my faxes, and it took a while for people to get back to me. So I was actually doing odd jobs for a number of months, and I was really getting disappointed because it was a few months of just watering plants and just doing a bunch of odd jobs until this job came through at a company called Bell Geospace, and they were very big in the oil and gas sector, and they needed a weather modeling and all kinds of modeling, and they were hiring for a hardcore mathematician, which is what I was, and it was perfect. But I wanted to say this just as how I got that job. I had just applied to about 85, I had faxed my resume to about 85 different places.
Right.
I borrowed a fax machine from a friend and sent out 85 faxes. And I'm like, I'm good. I'm just going to wait back for people to call me for interview. And my friend said to me, so the next day was a Sunday, or 2 days later was a Sunday, and the Sunday paper would come out. And my friend called me and said to me, "So did you get the Sunday paper to apply for a job?" I'm like, "No, because I sent out like 85 resumes on Friday. Why would I go for the Sunday paper now?" And the person said to me, "You better get your blankety blank out of bed, because I know you're sleeping in on Sunday, and get the Sunday paper and apply for all the jobs there that you." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And so, you know, I got out of bed, I got the Sunday paper, and there was just one job ad. It had hardly any, it was like mathematician, master's degree at least, fax, you know.
Right.
So I faxed it, and that was the job that I got. And I always think back at that it's like I gave it, that friend kind of pushed me to give it one more shot, and none of those 85 people that I had faxed on Friday called me for an interview. But when I faxed that one job on Sunday, they gave me the job the next day. It's just like, you know, it's really a funny thing how
That's
these things,
awesome.
yeah.
But I think these things sometimes happen for a reason.
You know,
right? There are
yeah.
things in our life that, you know, it's just that one extra thing. But
Yeah, that
that's,
one extra
that's
thing.
That determination, right?
Right,
To
that determination.
actually do something.
Or a good friend to kind of kick you in the butt to make you
something
do
like
it, you know?
So is there anything in those years, right, before you kind of got into the other field, was there anything you would change about things you did?
You know, one thing that I think this is the one thing that I would change was just my attitude about the in-between periods in my life when I maybe didn't have a job, and sometimes it's like when you're at a high level in your career, you tend to be maybe overqualified for a lot of jobs, and
Right.
you know, I'm going for like the jobs that are the 1 in 1,000 job, you know? And so, and I think I eventually learned this, but sometimes you have to just keep on pursuing for that dream job, but it might take a year until that comes through. And in the meantime, if you're working at a Borders or whatever, just pay the darn bills, you know, and just get a job. And so that was what early on, I mean, I kind of was doing, but I was feeling like I was abnormal.
Right.
that I had to do that, because I'm like, here I am, I have all these credentials. Why am I having to sweep floors, so to speak? But I think there's times in life where we're going to sweep floors and we're going to be, doing those things. It's just how life is until, the big thing happens.
Well, it's okay. Sweeping those floors is a lot like being an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
too,
it
so
is,
It works out in the end,
and it
right?
applies to being an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
because that's a lot of what we're doing. Maybe 20% of the time doing what you love to do in the business, which is your product and stuff, but then the other 80% of the time you're doing your accounting and your taxes and your marketing and
Right.
all this other stuff.
The minutia.
Yeah, the
right?
minutia.
Right. So it's interesting. So talking about that, so you moved from being a brilliant student, right, into research scientist, and then did some interesting projects, and then on to being an entrepreneur, right? So I'm going to kind of come back to some of the stuff just in STEM in a few minutes. But so how did you know when that you really wanted to be an entrepreneur? What was like the thing that kind of flipped the switch and you're like, I'm going to go do something on my own?
Right. So I think what it was that I was not, the industry that I was in, which was weather forecasting for the energy industry. Energy was one of these industries that it's like oil and gas and power. It had its ups and it had its downs.
Sure.
And I was in that whole era when I worked for Enron, and I
Sure.
was doing modeling for them, mathematical modeling of climate and weather patterns for their energy trading activities. And I saw the whole thing, and the industry was just in chaos.
Right.
And so with that being said, I just saw a lot of the chaos of the energy industry, but I also saw the needs and the opportunity that, and it was really my husband in 2009 who said to me, or maybe it was 2008, and I was telling him about what I would do for these energy companies, and he said, well, rather than going into one company and doing this for one company as a consultant, because I went from after that thing went down with Enron, then I went into consulting, and I was,
Sure.
and so it was after consulting, then it was kind of a lot of people in entrepreneurialism, they go through the consulting route, where you kind of.
That's very normal.
Yeah, it's very normal. You have a job, and then you become more of a service person, providing solutions to companies yourself, and then so
you're able to assess things and
you're
fix
able to
things.
assess it and fix it and know what the need is in the industry and know that industry wide. So my husband said, well, and I didn't even know this about him, because he had his degree in chemical engineering, and he was a chemical engineer, and he said, I could turn your thing into software. And I said, what? You could turn this weather forecast whole thing into a software?
Right.
And so I said, wow. And then we started thinking, wow, then everybody can get it, not just this one company. And seeing the monetization of something that would be scalable, like an IT solution, and getting,
Sure.
a tech solution. And so he's the one who really made it happen. He's that kind of person. He's an implementer, and that's a lot of our IT people out there. They can take that dream and then, with the nuts and bolts, make it a reality.
So he's your technical co-founder.
Yes,
All
he
right.
is.
So he's your husband and your work husband.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a term we use a lot in entrepreneurship. So your work husband or your work spouse, right? So you have to have that. So it's like he gets to be both, which is good. So I get that, and I think that makes perfect sense. I think most startups end up with a scenario like that, right, where they have a person who is the visionary person or understands what the customer need is,
Right.
and then you need someone who can actually turn that into something that can be delivered to the customer in a way they want to consume it.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So you went through that. So it's interesting. What would you say, since you did that, are the top 3 skills that somebody needs to be an entrepreneur?
The top 3 skills to be an entrepreneur.
A successful one.
Okay. Not in this order.
No, order.
So it's just kind of as it comes to my mind. So one skill I would say is the ability to believe in your idea when nobody else believes in it. Because sometimes you have something that is so different and so new and so revolutionary that your friends think you're crazy, your parents think you're going to work yourself into a heart attack, people just, people may or may not get it, or
Right.
Or you go try to pitch for angel investing and they tell you that you suck. Or, like all these things can happen. Or
Sure.
somebody thinks that they know what you should do better than you know what should be, and all this kind of stuff. So it's the ability to just stick by your guns and see it through. So I think that's one thing is certainly you want to take advice and stuff, but there's a passion when you're an entrepreneur, something inside that it's just, at least for me, this weather modeling was something that was just always there, but I could never get it off the ground because I didn't have my technical co-founder until I got married. And what was interesting about, what was interesting about it's really funny, but what, about this whole thing, when I had this idea with the weather prediction system and stuff, the algorithms that I had, I would do it on a proprietary basis for companies, but I actually I was so hesitant to just hire IT people to help me because it was proprietary, and what if they just went and took my idea and did it themselves because I didn't have any patents or anything. So it did work out really well. And so another attribute for an entrepreneur, I think, is to learn to live on ramen noodles for a while.
Yeah.
I really think that.
Just use a lot of sriracha or soy
Yeah,
sauce.
like figure out how to live on the cheap, and don't let it really just discourage you or get to you too much. Just there's something in the Bible that says, I know how to be abased, I know how to abound. Like you just, when the money's there, that's great. When it's not there, you know what to do in that situation as well. And you can survive. You can make it through all the ups and downs that happen because they happen. And it may be an extended period of time, but you just like survival. You can survive through all of that. And then the third thing about being an entrepreneur, I think is it's inspiration. I think or intuition sometimes, where I don't know. There's times when your life it makes different forks in the road, and you just go and meet somebody, and you don't know why you met them, or following advice, just having good instincts. I think a person can be really, really smart, but have really, really bad instincts. I don't know. I mean,
I think that's true.
And
I think that's true.
And it's like maybe you're even too smart for your own instincts. You're not really following your gut feeling about something. You're maybe you're hiring someone and
they're analyzing it too much.
Analyzing it too much or something. Or say you're hiring someone, they have everything on paper, but you just don't feel right about the person, to hire them. And so I think that's a good quality to have. It's maybe a soft skill. And I'm going to add a fourth one because there's that one, and then a fourth one I would say is communication. And maybe you're not a big talker or whatever, but just I think that the founder has to be able to articulate what it is that they're doing to people, to somebody. Because you can have the best thing and the greatest thing and the most wonderful thing, but if I can't sit here with you, Joy, and sell you on it,
right?
And even though I'm not a salesperson, but I have to be able to explain it to you so you can get it. And so they have to articulate it so that people can get it.
That's a really good point, and actually leads perfectly into my next question. So I read a lot about StatWeather, right? And I'm an avid diver, so we pay very close attention to things that are going on. And I also, in my security business, we do a lot with risk in a different way than what you guys do. So it's interesting. It basically says, if you kind of delve down a little bit, that it's an application of basal neural networks, right? And some AI, which I assume also then the algorithms on the back end, which you've developed, provide the predictability. So if you were describing the state-of-the-art weather prediction system that StatWeather has, how would you describe that? In layman's terms, so we can all understand it.
Okay. So what we see in the weather world is you turn on the TV, and you might get the Weather Channel or something like that, or your local Bay News 9,
right?
Here in Tampa. And that's great for the short term, but what they don't give you on the internet or on the news is what's going to happen 3 months down the line. So you might say, well, but that's because they can't get it right 3 days down the line, you know? So why are you going to even talk to me about 3 months down the line?
Right.
And so the thing is that the way that they get the weather forecast on TV is that the government cranks out supercomputer models based on the current atmospheric conditions. So you take the weather today, they put that into a set of equations, and then they pump out the weather for tomorrow.
Sure.
Okay? But there's a whole different way of forecasting weather, which is, what if I looked at weather, like 100 years of historical weather, and I'm looking at the whole drought pattern of the US and the patterns going on with the cold up in the Northeast and all these things? What does that pattern suggest should happen in the next 3 months? That's looking at it from, it's like the weather forecaster on TV is looking at things through a microscope, but the long-range forecaster is looking at it through a telescope.
Right.
And it's a whole different way of looking at the weather picture. And so that's what we do, is we data mine on very long-term historical records of weather and extract patterns and relationships that can give us insight into 3 months out, 1 year out, approximately when extreme events should occur, with what probabilities. So it's a lot of data mining and data processing, and it's not a whole lot of traditional meteorology, as a matter of fact. It's very little of that.
That's cool. So actually, that's good too. So I want to talk to you a little bit. I read, when we talked before, you told me that you'd written this blog. So I went and I read this information. So it's a great read. So if anybody hasn't seen this, Ria actually blogs for some different things. If you look at the energy blogs /weather, she actually wrote an article about the 10 challenges that women face. And if you read through it, it's not just about women. She actually talks about the fact that it's universally applicable, but in the STEM field in particular, right? So there are some things like competition, connections, camaraderie, coping, compensation, children, customs, confidence, conferences, and comfort, right? And then at the end, and I thought, well, probably the most fitting statement out of it, I just kind of want you to talk about what you wrote and why you wrote, because it's brilliant. She says, any of us, not just women, can be subject to discrimination. What's important is how we respond, not allowing it to stop us from going after our plans and our dreams. With enough persistence and courage, wisdom and commitment, even barriers of discrimination can be overcome. So talk a little bit about maybe why you wrote the article and why you think maybe more girls or more people don't choose to go into STEM. I mean, like, it's obviously a very lucrative field, right? You know, I don't think that boys are any brighter than girls. So why don't people choose that?
Yeah, so my article, I have 10 reasons for it, and I'll just touch on it. I think that with women, regardless, we have to be very confident, and we have to have that confidence and that boldness to do what we want to do. And sometimes our parents don't know how to direct us. Sometimes our schools don't know how to direct us. Sometimes the guidance counselors don't know how to direct us, and we have to be very independent. And we have to, figure out the ropes. And sometimes what's unfortunate is that sometimes the school will identify that this person is the genius and this person should go to MIT in science, and here you are, but maybe you're really the most promising person. But the school doesn't think so because so-and-so got a perfect score on their SAT. And so-and-so, is, just all of these kind of batteries, but you might be more creative.
Sure.
You might be a better problem solver. Maybe it doesn't show up on that standardized test or that final exam. And so the school doesn't necessarily identify or encourage certain people.
Sure.
And so that's where it's such a tricky thing, because what I've seen in research science, and also, we see it all the time in entrepreneurialism that it's not, just like the straight A PhD who goes on to become a great entrepreneur.
Right.
Sometimes it's just the people who are outside of the mold who go on and do great things, and in spite of it, and maybe even because of it, they rise to the heights that they rise to. And so I just think that the greatest thing is regardless of what our SAT score may have been, and all these things that are trying to put us in a box, we have to know who we are and what we want to do, and look at subject matters deeper and research it more deeply. Like, what really does it take to be a good scientist? Sure. Is it a high SAT score? And usually not. So, yeah.
We actually talked a little bit about that, right? We were talking about the difference between what people perceive it to be when we had the conversation, right? That people generally perceive it's all of this testing and standardizing stuff, which a lot of it, I think, going through the educational process is, but then talk a little bit about, like, once you get into the field, right? Because it's a little different then, and maybe more entrepreneurial than what most people think.
Yes, yes. So would we get into the field? I was having a wonderful conversation with Mary here in the audience, Adventures in Engineering, and she is pioneering or piloting a new STEM program. And what she was saying is that the educational system doesn't necessarily train people for the job that you're now going to do afterwards. And she's a chemical engineer, and so she's speaking from her own, perspectives as well. And so when you go into the workforce, like, say, working for something with, say, Department of Defense, even with a government job, so much of it is not just your ability to do fancy science and math, but your ability to communicate that information to colonels and your military people and all the people who are making decisions on your information. And so it's the ability to relate to people and to bring people together and to rally them around this technology that you may have developed. And another thing is that a lot of problems, I think, in technology can be solved by a very deep understanding of fundamental things. It's not, you have, like, very complicated and complex frameworks, but I think it's the people who can really understand very simple things very deeply, deeper than the average person. That provides a lot of insight right there. And so in the sciences, it's, I can understand why somebody like Albert Einstein, where, they wanted to kick him out of school and stuff, but he was a deep thinker.
Right.
People like that who can, invent more.
So do you think one of the things that maybe has helped you be so successful is the fact that you have both that left brain, right brain thing going for you, that you have the ability to look at those really complex problems and solve those, with algorithms and math, and looking at how you apply that? Because a lot of what you've done is math and then, looking at astronomy, right?
Right.
So those seem to be, like, if I look at your past, right, those seem to be your big passions.
Right.
But then the ability not only to deal with the science side of it, but the related part of it, right? To be able to kind of take a step back and look at the big picture and then apply that technology to solving the problem.
Yes, I think so. And when I was in the 8th grade, I had a teacher. His name was Charles Kepke, and he's no longer alive, but back then he said to me, he knew how I was playing the piano, and he was the person who saw my science project of my scale model of the solar system and said to me, "Don't come back to my earth science class anymore." And I said, "All right, you just kicked me out of your earth science class." And he put on a piece of paper the phone number of somebody. Okay. And her name was Dr. Eleanor Helene, and she was a foremost discoverer of different asteroids. And she was at Jet Propulsion Labs in California.
Oh, for Lawrence Livermore.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And she was down there, and I was in elementary in California at the time. And he said, "Just call her, and she'll help you." And so I called her, and I told her I got kicked out of earth science class and told her the whole story. And so she said, I'll help you. And I didn't really recognize who she was at the time, and I didn't recognize it until, and I hate to say this, until she died recently. And I really started researching her life, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's a legend. But she was so, she kind of mentored me with that stuff. I mean, I would just call her on the phone and talk to her as if she was my friend. I didn't have a sense of like who I'm talking to, you know. I was a kid, I didn't really know, but she thought this was really cool too, you know. And so, but where I was going with that is that this is the man who said to me, don't ever give up playing the piano and don't ever give up your science, because, and he said, when you grow up and become a great scientist, you will always need to engage the creative side of your mind, and so don't ever give up your piano. And he made me swear an oath that I wouldn't.
That's great.
And so, now I don't think I was very faithful to that because I did give it up here,
For a
you know, I wasn't
while.
but I kind of came back to it. And the whole idea, it was so true that there was so much that, you know, there's the technical part of science, but then there are the ideas that are coming from left field of how to tie in different concepts to solve real world problems that maybe other people haven't thought about before.
I think it makes sense. I mean, for me, like kind of turning off and being able to do something different, it doesn't mean like sitting and watching, you know, TV all day, but to be able to have something that's completely different than the thing that you normally do, I think gives your mind the ability to reset, and you come back and look at problems differently because of that.
I think
Right.
so, yes.
So a little bit about like, so you've kind of gone through that, you went through some, and I mean, I would argue that there's very few women, or men for that matter, who've accomplished what you have in that realm. I think regardless of sex, it doesn't really have a whole lot to do with it there. And you came up with the idea, we kind of talked a little bit earlier about how you came up with the idea for StatWeather. So talk a little bit more about kind of how you started the company, and then maybe a little bit about capital, because you guys made a decision to go a very different way. So talk a little bit about that and maybe why you did that.
Sure. So my husband and I, you know, decided to start this company, but we still had our jobs, and so I was working contract, so I was kind of contract to contract with this job that I had, and my husband had some leeway as well. So we were doing this as like the garage band, you know, kind of thing, like literally in our garage.
It's okay, we can put your garage on that map. You know, when you go to Silicon Valley, you have all the garages, so we'll have your
Yeah,
garage.
like we lived here in South Tampa, and you know, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment, and it had a garage at the bottom.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so, like, that's where we were starting to build our models, was in the garage. So we were just doing that. And initially, we thought that this would just be extra revenue, you know, just like a side thing. And that sounded cool and stuff. But then as we started marketing what we had, customers were saying, well, this isn't good enough. You got to do this. And we're like, oh my gosh. So now we're developing this. And then, you know, go to the customer and they're like, well, really what I want is, I don't want a forecast that tells me the temperature for the week's average. You need to tell me 3 months in advance, like, do it like this. You know, tell me when I'm going to get a storm, or when. They just had all of these things that they wanted.
Right.
And, you know, we were like, well, if we're going to do this, I guess we're going to have to do this, do what they want, not what we think that they want. And so we kind of had the product was evolving, and it became a deeper and deeper and deeper product that we were delivering to people. Very full featured, very rich with the weather forecast, and it was very accurate, very on target with the things that we were doing. And we were still even discovering how accurate this really could be. I mean, I had experience with these techniques in general, but our customers were dictating to us specifications that even blew our mind.
Okay.
Like, could people really do that? Well, let's just do it, because we're bootstrapping and we could use the money, you know, because we're having to hire another programmer to come in and do this, you know, and it gets expensive and all.
Sure.
And so so we started the company on our own savings and our own capital and stuff, and we were doing that, and we did not go the route of pitching investors. And I spoke to a total of 3 angel investors who gave me advice but no money. And I didn't really pitch. I didn't have a pitch deck. I didn't have a 2-minute speech, or elevator. I had never watched Shark Tank, and so I didn't know. We just have a product. We just want to get out there. I didn't know the whole thing that you're supposed to do. So after 3 angel people, I was like, well, I don't know. So we made a decision that we were just going to bootstrap, and bootstrapping meant we're gonna just hustle and make money from the customers, and whatever we make, we're just going to put back into the company and keep going like that, and keep eating ramen noodles until until we build it up. And so the thing there are pros and cons if you decide to go the whole bootstrapping route, or if you do the investors route. And so the thing is, we maintained 100% ownership of the company, did things the way that we wanted to do it, which maybe, went against what an investor may have wanted us to do, or may have, thought that we should do. But we did it. And then another thing is that this was really, I think, the primary driving reason why I really preferred bootstrapping was because we both wanted to have the market validate what we were doing, not just like, okay, give me the money and then let's validate. But if the market really wanted what we had and would pay for it, then we knew it would be a successful company. And putting our entire skin in the game with that, and it was all our risk on that, it would really show whether this company was truly feasible in a short turnaround, because we got to make the money, we got to make the sales, otherwise the company is going to go under. And so we were really in that first year just hustling and doing this is the thing, Guy Kawasaki, who is the evangelist for Apple, he said, I really like the things that he says and that he talks about with Lean Startup. And he said something that was so true, so true. He said, when you have your startup, you're doing everything at the same time. Like, it's not a neat thing where now I build my product, and now I have first launch, and now I get all these customers, and now I build another It's like you're building product, you're selling, you're you're doing everything at the same time. Sure. And it's just, it can be very disconcerting because this product is not it's not this fully built out thing that looks so pretty, like that you see on TV on the Weather Channel, But we got to get out there and make some money and kind of sell it the way that it is, and then build some more, and just all these processes going at the same time, this type of organized chaos.
No, but I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, so you're really responding to the customer.
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
and
very
to the market.
Customer focused.
Do you think that rapid experimentation then is really important when you're building a product?
I think so. I think it is. Now, I had a head start. I had been doing weather and climate modeling for 20 years. So it was a subject matter that I had very deep understanding of. But even with the 20 years behind me, and I had studied under the fathers of chaos theory. I mean, the entire school of Mandelbrot and all those, right. That's where I came from. And so I had studied from the best. I had the best training, but even still, there was rapid experimentation. Well, does this work? Does this nuance work? The customer wants this. Does this really, a lot of testing, no matter how much you know up here.
Right.
So, and another thing with I think the whole bootstrapping idea was that, quite honestly, we were moving so quickly in that first year, I did not have the time to put together a pitch deck to go to investors or to do that.
You mean you were too busy actually selling and talking to clients?
Right. I mean, we had to make that decision. We had to consciously say, are we going to get more funding and focus on this, or just hit the pavement, literally, like door to door with these energy companies and hitting them door to door, calling them up. Can I come to you now and show you this? And very scrappy, you know. But I was like, you know, I don't know, if we go the investor route and you go through all this work, they still might not fund you, and then they might take 6 months of due diligence, and then we won't have anything. Let's just go sell, you know? And so that's just what ended up happening. And the product did, it validated, but it wasn't that we had the genius, like that we had the product and everybody wanted it, but we kept developing it to become what they wanted.
But that seems normal, right? So if you start with a core product,
Yeah.
right, and based on feedback that you had from customers that you'd done business with, right, that you'd worked with in the past, so you had
Right.
some basis for it, and you're doing rapid prototyping, you're taking it through there, then you're actually building features or additions to the product that you know the customer wants before you build it,
Right, right,
which kind of does this crazy thing like ensure a revenue stream.
right. Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit, maybe like some words of advice you have to people. So what, out of all the things you've done, right, so it sounds like you really love what you're doing now. What
I do.
is the most satisfying moment you've had so far in business?
In business,
Yeah.
the most satisfying moment I've had, maybe it's moments, because it happens from time to time, and it's when I'm face to face with my customer and they say to me, your weather forecast is really reliable. And, you know, and they're talking about our weather forecast as if they're like, you know, buying a reliable light switch or something that you buy at like Lowe's hardware store or something. This is a reliable tool or something. And that people can come to think about our service as reliable as another product rather than like this hit and miss kind of, oh, you know, the weatherman is always wrong kind of thing.
Right.
And to get away from that stigma. And that,
pretty cool.
that was my most rewarding,
Okay.
those are my most rewarding moments.
I like that. So on the other side of that, what's the biggest mistake, right, or mistakes? What are the biggest mistakes you think you've made in getting to where you are today?
In getting to where, like
From the business perspective, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, startups are tough, right?
yeah, they're tough.
As you're going through stuff. So
Right, right.
maybe if there was a mistake you made along the way, you think if you had done it differently, that you would have gotten further quicker.
Yeah, well, here's an interesting thing. And I didn't learn this until later on, kind of an inside thing is that when you have money, it's easy to get money, like through banks and stuff, but then when you need money, then you can't get the money.
Right.
And, you know, it's just, it's one of those like things. So when you have the money, get more money.
There you go.
So that when you don't have the money, you
have some extra money.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. I don't think anybody's ever said that before, so that's actually really, really good. So can you share, like, is there a funny story about something you guys did as you're building the business? I mean, it's kind of interesting because your business partner is also your husband,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that can get kind of weird sometimes. I mean, like for me, I have my partner is also my partner, right? So he and I kind of, it's good on some days. When it's good, it's really good.
Yeah.
And when it's not, it's usually really not. So how has that been for you? I mean, you know, it's, you guys are both scientists, so it may be a little
Yeah,
bit easier.
well, the thing is that it wasn't funny at the time, okay? But
Okay.
I look back now and I laugh. And it was, you know, when we were in the first years when my husband was programming all these things and all this stuff, I would say to him, well, why can't you tell people how awesome this is? And he goes, because I really don't know if your forecasts work or not. I'm like, but this is our company.
Right.
I mean, this is like the whole idea, right? That we're weather forecasters and it's like a better mousetrap.
Right.
He's like, well, is it though? And I was like, honey, I've been doing this for 20 years. Like, seriously, trust me.
Right,
He's like,
that's right.
how can I just trust you with this? And he had to be convinced, like you would convince a customer by the data that this actually worked. And so now he's like, of course,
Now
the
he's
biggest
convinced, right?
evangelist
Of
of
course.
this product. But in the beginning, he kind of didn't really buy it.
That's good. I like that. So how do you keep like things from bleeding into your personal life, right? So it's hard when you're a business woman,
Yeah.
right? So, you work together and you live together, but you've got to want some separation of that, right? How do you
Yeah.
manage that?
I'm not very good at it.
Yeah, me either.
But sometimes we have to just make a decision, hook or the crook, to like get away for the weekend or something. And here in Florida, we had the benefit of the Florida Disney passes, the Florida resident passes.
There you go. Yep.
And so we would just, that was our way of just getting away, going to be with Mickey Mouse for the day.
Makes it hard to talk about work.
Yeah, just totally being out of it. And that really helped us because it was sort of local, to Tampa Bay.
Sure,
It's an
not far.
hour and 15 minutes. And so we just, some days we have our Epcot after 4, and just
All right.
hop in the car and just go to Epcot, for the
pretty
evening, and then
cool.
maybe come back later on at night. So that was what we did. We just found, local stuff that didn't cost too much, but that we could get away for a little bit. Because as an entrepreneur, you can't really, I don't know, in our business, you can't get away for that long.
Right.
Getting away for like an evening is getting away. Whereas everybody else, they come home and watch TV. We're like coming home and coding, So for us, just having an evening off is like, wow, we got an evening off,
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And that actually was, I was going to ask if there's huge sacrifices you've made to be an entrepreneur, but you kind of are answering that. Anything
Yeah.
else you want to add to that?
Well, we've learned a lot about being an entrepreneur because my husband and I don't have business degrees, and we didn't, we weren't like I said, I had never watched Shark Tank until years after I started StatWeather. And so there was a lot that we just kind of did not knowing what we were doing. And then later on, we read this book on bootstrapping by Seth Godin.
Oh, Seth Godin, yeah. Uh-huh.
And then we read things on lean startup and all these things, and we're reading these books, and we're like, wow, so we're not crazy. So other people do like how we did, Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So I want to add one more thing, and then just kind of let you maybe comment on why you did this, and then I'm going to go to like a little rapid fire thing. So we'll open up to questions for the audience. So I talked a lot about what Ria had done in the past before, but there was an interesting thing that I found, and I kind of had to do some digging to find it. You also founded the Freedom Scholars of America, which is a scholarship fund, and it awards scholarships to students who may not be eligible for financial aid because their parents may be undocumented immigrants or their mothers are returning to school or a part-time basis. So talk a little bit about what that is and why it was so important to you.
Yes, it was important to me. It's one of those things that was really deep in my heart, that I wanted to have a kind of a non-profit or a scholarship fund that rewarded things that was a little bit different from the mainstream, so that those kinds of people could get funded too. Things that I valued.
Right.
And the things that I valued were things like work ethic and people who maybe have to fight against the odds,
Sure.
to go to school. And people who have a lot of need, but also people who have a lot of vision and who see things from what they want to accomplish having a real impact in the country. And so in terms of that scholarship fund, we just put what we could into there and enlisted our friends who wanted to donate, and it's just one of those kinds of grassroots kinds of things. But to date, we've awarded about 100 scholarships.
That's awesome.
Since we started that fund.
That is truly awesome.
Yeah. So,
Very cool.
freedomscholars.com if you know
Awesome.
someone who, be interested in the scholarship program.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. So now we're going to do a little section. Have you ever seen Inside the Actors Studio? She's going to go, nope, because I don't watch TV.
No.
It's okay.
I do like TV, but there's only certain, I
hear you.
I
I
watch
like-
Law and Order and stuff, but I haven't seen that one.
I watch more crazy shows like that too. So I'm just going to ask you some questions. So just say the first thing that pops into your mind, right? So it's pretty easy. So like a little rapid fire thing.
Okay.
So what item do you own that you would never sell?
It was my grand piano, but I sold it for my business.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to buy another one later. All right, so what is your most unusual skill?
My most unusual skill is that I can do bird calls. I don't know if that's that unusual, but
That's pretty unusual.
But I, yeah.
That's good. I like it. Go ahead, do one.
I would, but it'll take the makeup off my face, so I'm
Okay,
sorry.
we're not going to make her do that.
But I might do it afterwards, because
Yeah, so afterwards it'll be
you know,
fine.
because you come up
It's like-
and do all this.
So do you work best with a pen and paper or digitally?
Pen and paper for sure.
So what is more important, strength, speed, or stamina?
Stamina.
What historical figure do you most admire?
George Washington.
What is the best compliment you can receive or give to another person?
Ooh, there's so many good ones. The best compliment I can receive or give to another person. You're a wonderful person on the inside.
Okay. Who do you think does a great job?
My husband.
Awesome. When was the last time you tried something new?
Right now.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Oh, astronaut.
That's pretty good. What profession would you definitely not want to do?
Anything like mechanically inclined.
Okay. All right. And if you could be any animal, what would you choose?
A lion.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
So there were a million other questions I could have asked Ria, but we're going to open it up to the audience now. So anybody who would like to ask her a question, we'll answer some questions.
Hi. I have a 10-year-old daughter, goes to school right up off of Kennedy, and she's interested in science. What can I do to encourage her in to the STEM field?
Sure. I think that you can take her to things like science museums and buy her lots of science, fun science books through like the Scholastic Book Club and things like that. And just anything that'll stimulate her and expose her to different things, whether it's science DVDs and CDs, or if you find certain things for her to listen to on YouTube. So note that all of the things I'm suggesting kind of go outside of the curriculum that she would be receiving. I'm not advocating purely academic things, although that's important. She's very precocious in science. Then as she gets a little older, she can participate in programs like the Johns Hopkins CTY program for gifted students, or other maybe local STEM types of programs for gifted students. But get her into learning about cool things in science. That in school, you learn about, okay, there's 9 planets and these are the parts of a plant or something. But there's a big world of science out there. So just expose her as much as possible with kids, magazines that encourage science, things like that, extracurricular stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hi, with your experience in climate change and everything, weather, I was wondering if there are any technologies that really excite you about bettering our environment, like batteries or solar power or whatever Elon Musk is doing. Like, if there's anything that really excites you for the future in that sense.
I think that all renewable energy excites me. And so it's hard to choose. The thing about renewable energy is that there's been a lot of debate over the cost-benefit analysis of it. And so that's always what's getting in the way right now,
Right.
because some of these technologies are so fledgling and new, and it's costing more to develop than what it's bringing in revenue over a certain set period of time. But I think that still, props to all those people who still continue to forge forward with the innovation, despite the fact that, quantum computers and things like this are not bringing in all this revenue right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I was wondering if you had any problem with Enron or Duke Energy when you were developing the algorithms. Did they ever claim ownership over your IP for your company?
What's interesting about that is that what I had developed there were things that were just very, in its infancy, things that I was thinking about in its infancy that I was applying that was working. But a lot of those techniques were things that other scientists were kind of teaching me, so it was already in the public domain, maybe on the fringe, but in the public domain. So once I got into consulting, then the creative juices, and I had this idea, and it was at a time when people weren't talking about artificial neural networks. And so I said, I want to apply artificial intelligence to weather forecasting. And it was at a time when nobody was really, that wasn't being talked about. And so that was when I said, okay, I'm gonna do this.
That's good. That's good.
Are the polar ice caps going to melt in the future?
That's a really long range one, aren't you?
Yeah, that is. Yeah. Well, I was just giving a presentation on this 2 days ago, and people want to know where I stand on it. And I'm in the middle of it, where I think that some things, I think that what we do, what man does, affects the environment and can affect the climate, but I also think there are a myriad of natural causes as well. And so with that in mind, I think man-made or not, what's going on with the polar ice caps tends to happen on a paleoclimatic basis anyway. So that's the answer.
Mine's not so much a question, but just a thank you.
What's that? I didn't catch it.
Mine's not really a question. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank
Oh,
you for being a Ginsu Knight, for trying so many different things, and being such a great role model for our girls and myself. So.
Thank you.
So it's really fun to talk about successes, but sometimes we don't know why you've been successful. Failures are sometimes much more obvious. So if you would share with us your grandest failure and what you learned from it.
Yeah. No, this is a good one. So when I was in, I don't know if this qualifies like a grand failure, but something where I really wasn't successful. So the first time I really experienced such big disappointment, I was in high school, where I entered the Westinghouse science competition, and I didn't place or anything. I didn't get a call back. I didn't make it on to the next round. And it was the same project that I later went on to the MIT science competition, won first place. And the thing about the whole Westinghouse, about that whole thing, I was so distraught over this that I didn't even get to advance on. And I learned from a very early age not to let it stop me from entering another science competition. And I entered the same project into a different competition. And that was, even though it felt so bad, sometimes as bad as it feels, I have to just, it's like, as bad as it is, there's that, okay, turn it on its head. Let's go again. Let's shoot for the stars. They're telling me that this is no good. And I'm just going to keep pushing with it. I'm going to defy that. And that was something I had learned early on with that.
Is there any possibility you could scale your technology down to the consumer level so that people could buy weather forecasts for 6 months ahead, plan vacations, this sort of thing?
Yes. And so the consumer market, that's a huge market, and it's a great application for our weather forecasts. And so that's one of the areas that we would be moving toward. Yeah, absolutely.
Sort of a follow-up to that. Are you planning on building an API to expose your predictions? To enable third-party developers to make it available for the consumer market?
I think that's what Mark and his team are going to be working on in the future.
Our company's going with would be more licensing with large corporations like Thomson Reuters or Bloomberg, and they would ultimately deliver the data to the end consumer or the Weather Channel or something like that. We are not, it's our IP, and we don't have an open, it's not open for developers at this time, other than just data transfer or extracting the data from our systems. But yes, for the end user or the individual user, it'll probably be through some company that already has the distribution channel set up. Because we only have 14 employees, so that's like a Weather Channel or something that will deliver that.
Yeah. How long did it take for you and your better half, other half, because we're in that same situation. How long did it take you before you knew you made it?
Before we knew we made it, I don't know. I by making it, for me, it was the point where I think the company made a transition from breaking even or making a profit, and that was the point. Because I don't know, they say that even companies like Twitter haven't yet turned a profit, so that kind of doesn't make me feel too bad. Even though our profit is like, we're not dealing in billions and
Right.
billions of dollars like these other companies, but it makes me feel good that when it becomes self-sustaining. And so that took a couple of years to get there. But I understand, I mean, depending on your industry, that could take 7 years, it could take 9 years. Tech or something where you've already put a lot of sweat equity into your product and everything over all these years, it could be, much shorter, like a year or two. So it just depends on what your industry is before you can live off your,
Let me ask the B side of that. What about your husband? When did your husband think he made it?
I think,
Same way you were, or?
He's smiling.
is that what you thought too?
For me, I knew that we made it when my wife's story about how I was like, is it really any good? And will anybody really buy this? And no, I'm an engineer. I need the data. I got to prove it to myself. So what I decided was, we would go on some sales pitches, and I would say, we typically do a trial for our weather forecast. And I'd say, okay, guys, what's important to you? Where's the weather events that are important to you in the country? So, okay, Boston. Let's pull up Boston. So let's look at some forecasts that we had done a month or two ago and see how they panned out now. And the traders would be looking at it, like, oh, wow, you got that. And we're like, oh, we did? They're like, oh, you got that. We could have made a ton of money on that. I'm like, you could have? And they convinced me ultimately. And when I became convinced, then I knew that we made it. Because I knew that if I could understand it being an engineer and analyzing it to the nth degree in all the what-if scenarios, if I could accept it, and the customer was telling me that I could believe it and that it was valuable to them, very valuable. That's when I knew that we did it.
He's a natural born skeptic kind of person.
Most of those engineers are. It's okay.
So being that you're this amazing innovator, what's the one favorite product that you have that you can't live without, that you love the most, other than StatWeather?
Google search.
Cool. Anybody else? Oh, Scott.
How good is your pitch for music? I mean, and how much do you think, did you learn really young, and how much did that help you with math, do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting. So, when I was really young, I taught myself by ear how to play the piano, so I didn't know how to read notes early on. I was, in first grade, and the teacher was playing some tunes on the piano, and that was what I was like, oh, just got to know how to do that. And so I took every note of the piano, and I had my own, I called from the bottom like A, B, C, D. I kind of did my own notation in my head because I knew ABCs, how I could find different notes so I wouldn't lose where I put my fingers. So, and so that was what I was playing by ear when I was younger. And I don't know if at the time, if we couldn't afford piano lessons and couldn't afford a piano or whatever, so I used to just go to church service sometimes because then afterwards I could play the piano afterwards at the church. And so I think that the piano has, I don't know, there's like gray matter in the brain or something, you know. I think that's where it's helped me, because particularly as an adult, when I play the piano, I play very emotionally. It comes out, it's really from my heart rather than just head, like just,
Sure.
you know, okay, these are the notes and this is mechanically. So it's given a whole, I don't, it's kind of like which came first, the chicken or the egg? Was the piano the impetus for developing that part of me, or was it because I was developing that way that I gravitated toward it? I actually don't know.
Anybody else? One more. Yeah.
Heard that it's difficult to pick a name for a company. So was it difficult to pick the name for your company?
Oh, yes. Well, all of the names we were choosing were already taken. Those domain names were, you know, you go on GoDaddy and everybody had, you know, cool weather and weather edge and cutting edge weather and all these things that, you know, we were trying to do. And StatWeather was just like the redheaded stepchild of a name that nobody had taken, you know, on the internet. And so statweather.com was available, and .net and .info, and so it was like, okay.
But actually, that's not bad.
It wasn't
if your predictions are right? So it's statistics,
statistics and weather. Yeah. I mean, it fits. People can kind of infer what we're doing. Yeah.
Cool. Anybody else? One more. Okay.
So, how long is your standard forecast you can do with your prognosis? So, are you going half a year, 2 years, or which is the time horizon?
Right. So for extreme weather forecasts, like for heat waves, cold snaps, storms coming through, in 3 months ahead, we can target it to the day, plus or minus 1 day. We can target it and be right 80% of the time, if not more, this winter. So if it's something like a drought, because drought occurs more in like very long and slow patterns, that can be 2 years out. So it depends on what the phenomenon is that we're forecasting, but it'll go at least 3 months out, and some things will go as far as 2 years out. Yeah.
All right.
So what do you think about the prediction for hurricanes this summer?
Oh, is that everybody's question? There we go.
Well, this is a cool question. So let me just build up by saying that last year we had a very uneventful season.
We did.
Right, Atlantic hurricane season. And when you go on Wikipedia and look up 2013 Atlantic hurricane season, they show you what all the major big guns said was to happen, which was they thought that we were going to have this, you know, explosive hurricane season, and it came in like a lamb. Our forecast was the opposite at the same time, and we showed up at conference and we say, we don't think it's going to be much of a hurricane season, but it's contrarian, so just so you know. That's not what everybody else says, but you know. So this year it's the exact same thing. Now all those same people are saying it's going to be a lamb of a hurricane season, very mild season, and we're saying the opposite. So we're on its head. We're contrarian again.
So everybody that doesn't have hurricane shutters. Just so we're clear. All right, cool. Okay, all right, Abe, one more.
Who are the biggest users of StatWeather? Is it a lot of financial institutions, or?
Yes. So there were many different markets, and you know, with whatever product you have, we found that, okay, so weather, you know, everybody uses weather, but at the end of the day, we had to focus in on a certain market sector, a certain niche, and really tailor to them, because if you start to tailor to everybody, then your product isn't perfect for anybody.
Right.
On the outset. So in the beginning, we were like, okay, let's try agriculture, let's try this, let's try that. And it was really a perfect fit for the financial institutions, for the people trading energy, people with assets, smart grid kind of people who are looking to protect what they have. And so it all fell under the whole energy category and all different facets of the energy category. It isn't that everybody can't use weather, but just with what we were offering, they were able to pick it up quickly. Yeah.
It doesn't hurt that they actually have checkbooks big enough to write payments. Okay.
Right.
Awesome. Well, hey, everybody give Ria a really big round of applause. Thank you.